As the Daleks tell Davros he's on trial, and the very notion fills their creator with contempt for how low they've sunk without him. They insist that they do not need humanoid life forms, so he questions why they've gone to such lengths to bring him home. He regards himself as the Dalek Supreme and the Emperor Dalek all in one, demands to know what crimes he's been accused of. And when they explain that he hasn't committed any crimes, he releases this is a test rather than a courtroom trial. The Dalek tells him a schism has occurred within their ranks, and that their conquests are failing and wars are being lost. They need his direction to restore them to their former glory. He is furious with them. When the race began, they were unbeatable. But how could they cower in the darkness of their ancestral home, too frightened to venture out? Since when did the Daleks recognize fear of ability? He reminds them that they have a potential to be obsolete, but they've become mere ghosts of that what they once were, pale imitation of their past. He agrees to plan a new destiny of the Daleks, but to learn what's needed for the future first, he needs to think about what's gone before. Battlefields of Skaro. Captain Brogren oversees an execution squad fulfilling their duty for the greater glory of the Kalen nation. The event is witnessed by Colonel Nasgard, who later questions why the captain seemed unhappy with his task. Brogan explains that they were simply a handful of soldiers who panicked momentarily. Nasgard dismisses them as traitors and says deserting one's post is a thing. Nasgard compliments his daughter on her military form, and Brogan agrees that it's quite distinguished. Her father is very proud of her and regrets that Davros doesn't share her interests in soldiering, but Tashik advises him not to push the boy. Nasgard hands Yavel his medals. He was planning to give them to Davros, but now he thinks she would appreciate them more. Meanwhile, Calcula finds Davros by the Dromican Lake and tells him it's time to leave. He's cradling the body of a dead bird which fell from the sky. He's curious because nothing dies of old age on Skaro. He thinks it's contaminated by some kind of poison in the air, which means the poisonous chemicals must be getting closer. It won't be long before the lake itself is affected. When Quested meets Brogan, he asks about Nasgard's condition and learns that he's weakening, and that he's been acting irrationally. He's clearly unfit for command, and the counselor agrees that Brogan did his duty in sending his reports. It's a difficult time for the council, and the war has reached a critical stage, so senior members of the military elite must be completely dependable. Quested is worried that Nasgard's wife, but Brogan thinks she's a tough woman, and personally he's more concerned about the children. Lady Calcula takes her children to meet Martine, who welcomes Davros back to the school. Calcula says Davros is very excited about his extracurricular lessons, but she doubts the teacher has ever met her daughter before, as she's not exactly what you call bookish. Yavel is in military uniform and salutes Martine, but he's a civilian. Davros thinks she's being stupid. Martine acknowledges Calcula's pride in her children, but she accuses them to patronize her. She's due to attend an urgent meeting at the House of Congress, so she leaves the teacher with instructions to provide her with a daily report showing how Davros is getting on, so she can make sure her money's being well spent. She leaves with Yavel, with Martine offers to give Davros a guided tour of the education complex, after which they can discuss the syllabus. Davros is hostile to the teacher and objects strongly to being addressed as my boy. Nasgard tells his sister he can hear a strange noise, but she can't hear anything unusual, and assumes that because she's been away for too long, his ears are sensitive to the very sound that the house makes. He's upset by her intuition. He's imagining it, and he causes everyone conspiring to make him believe he's ill when he's not. She tells him he's been ill for many years, since before Davros was even born, but he claims that it can't be true, as he sighed. A perfectly healthy child. She breaks the news to him that he isn't Davros' real father. Nosgard is shocked and doesn't believe her. But she tells him the poisons in his body have already done their work before Davros was conceived, and he, along with, incapable of producing any more children. She saw his medical records when she was a nurse, and the evidence proved conclusively that he was sterile. Calcula knows that Tashik was discovered the truth, which is why she's always hated her so much, but in return Tashik hates Calcula for not having the courage to tell Nosgard the truth, for putting Davros ahead of Yavel at the very opportunity. Nosgard thinks he can hear the noise again. This time his sister can hear it too. He suggests that they check the communicator in case Calcula left it switched on, which gives Tashik another excuse to berate Calcula for wasting valuable energy. While they're searching, Nosgard asks if she knows who Davros' real father is. Before she can answer, they find a strange-looking device that's hidden in the communicator room. Nosgard realizes straight away where it is. Before he can do anything, the device suddenly explodes. The tour of the education complex ends in a room with Margentine describes as the center of the world, his laboratory. The impossible is made possible. The classroom where Davros will be spending much of his time is the next door, so Margentine can keep an eye on him. Davros refuses to be patronized, and although he has no desire to attend these lessons, he assures Margentine he won't have to watch over him every second of the day if Calcula's wish that syllabus be tailored to Davros' particular interests. And Davros is interested in the radiation chamber. The teacher says that he uses it to analyze the effect of different levels of radioactivity. On a variety of materials, Davros is fascinated to learn that Margentine uses living animals as test subjects. Although it doesn't actually disprove, he questions the teacher's right to subject any sentient being to such dangerous experimentation, knowing that it will die. Marshall points out that the scientist must keep his emotions and his work separate from each other, and that most of the greatest discoveries throughout history were made at the cost of someone else's pain and suffering. Nothing matters more than the truth, and sacrifices must sometimes be made in search for scientific enlightenment. He asks Davros if he's ready to make sacrifices. Yavel is devastated by the news of her father's death. Major Brogan tries to comfort her by pointing out that Nosgard and Tashik were at the center of the blast and wouldn't have suffered. Yavel doesn't understand who want to kill him, but Brogan says there'll be millions of thousands who want him dead. Not to mention the odd Khalid. Yavel tries to cling to hope that they weren't in the house when it blew up, but the Major confirms that both the ID chips registered in the termination at the time of the explosion. She swears vengeance on the people who committed this crime, and he notes, sadly, this means the cycle of violence will continue, as each side seeks to avenge what the other has done. He tells her that there are better ways to strike back, and the best of these is not to strike back at all. Yavel warns Brogan that he's starting to sound like a pacifist, but he says he prefer to be called a peace activist, or just a soldier of the conscience. At the school, Calcula tells Davros his father and Tashik have been horribly murdered. She adds that there's nothing to go back for now, so she suggests they make their home here in the city. Davros coldly asks for permission to go back to his studies, as he's been keen to present when Margentine opens the radiation chamber. Calcula agrees, as his work is far the best antidote to grief. Moments later, Calcula is joined by Counselor Quested, who just heard the news. He suggests she must be devastated, but she claims that she's in pieces. Not as many as her late husband, of course, but pieces nevertheless. He's curious as to the cause of the explosion, as he knows that there wasn't any Thal missiles falling near the lake. and he might suspect that there has been a planning a bomb to assassinate her. She admits that she was always felt too vulnerable there and believes she and Davros would have been better protected. And Yavel, of course, quested, asks about Davros, and Calcula says he's very upset and misses his father almost as much as she does. Argentine returns to the classroom and finds Davros reading up some of his old experiments. He's interested in finding out more about the mutated plants and mentioned in the reports, but Argentine explains that they were deemed too dangerous by the council and he was ordered to destroy them. Both he and Davros agree the councillors were fools, as there was a lot of potential in the plants, but Davros has been able to break the code in which Argentine broke the records and can prove the teacher disobeyed his orders. Argentine offers Davros his condolences, and the boy realizes he's trying to change the subject, so he suggests continuing the experiment. He asks whether anything has survived inside the radiation chamber, and Argentine invites him to see for himself. As they enter the laboratory, Davros is immediately struck by the smell of scorched flesh, and Argentine explains that prolonged exposure to the radiation causes alterations to make the genetic makeup, including both internal and external mutation. Alas, the subjects were really struck by the smells survive, and certainly not for long. Davros realizes this makes it impossible to know what ultimate form of such mutation takes for the first time. Argentine understands that his student regards the experiment as a form of evolution. The teacher offers to go inside the chamber alone, as the effects of the radiation are still unpredictable, but Davros insists on seeing results of the test for himself. Calcula returns home and is surprised to find Yavel there, after being excused service for the day because of the news about her father. Calcula is outraged about the platoon leader could be so soft in the head, and she orders her daughter to put her uniform back on and go back outside to face the world. Yavel accuses her mother of being upset, but she explains that the display of any emotion in a profession is interrupted as a sign of weakness. She won't allow people who cause such atrocity to have the satisfaction of knowing how deeply affected she is, and she thinks Yavel should do the same. Yavel accuses the Thals of being responsible, but Calcula says she doesn't think this is likely, and the truth probably lies a little close to home. She directly implicates Major Brogan, but Yavel insists he never do such a thing. And when Calcula suggests that he might be a spy, her daughter lets out that he's a peace activist and will never hurt anyone. The revelation that there's a peace activist inside the military elite horrifies Calcula, and she suspects that he's been manipulating Yavel. When her daughter points out that Brogan could easily have killed Nazgard on the battlefield without anyone suspecting, Calcula concludes that his plan was actually to wipe out the entire family, including Yavel. In the House of Congress, an air aid siren signals the evacuation of the building. Major Brogan reports to the Count requested and tells him one of their missiles has been launched into a densely populated area of Thal territory. The Council gave no such order, so it must have been an automatic response to the fact that a similar missile is heading in that direction, an almost identical trajectory. Quested is relieved to hear it isn't a nuclear missile, especially as Argentine's last experiment in the field to make for uncomfortable reading. Brogan urges Quested to join the other evacuees into the shelters, but he prefers to stay where he is. But then Brogan tells him the Thal missile is heading for somewhere east of the city, and the vicinity of the education complex. The counselor realizes that's where Davros is. The Thal missile reaches its target, and the damage to the education complex is considerable. Argentine calls out for Davros' help, but he's trapped under some fallen masonry. The youngster urges him to stay calm and struggles to pull his teacher clear before the rest of the wall collapses. Eventually he succeeds, and Argentine is relieved to discover that he has no broken bones. There isn't much left of the classroom anymore. Davros says all they can do now is alert the rescue parties to their presence, but the teacher refuses to wait around for the next missile to arrive, and he insists they both leave the area immediately. Rogan reports back to Quested. Casualties were minimal, and although a few buildings were damaged, there's nothing that cannot be repaired. He's worried that they may not be so lucky the next time, and the counselor agrees that they must prepare themselves for further attacks. But they will inevitably come. He believes this is nothing more than a reversal, and the next attack will be on a much larger scale. He reveals that the council has discussed the possibility of constructing a protective dome that could cover the entire city, and if a nuclear strike does go ahead, they can only hope there's nothing left that's worth protecting. Calcula arrives to demand news of her son, and they will tell her Davros has been leaving the complex with Margentine shortly after the explosion. They both appear to be unharmed. Calcula turns to Major Brogan and directly accuses him of not evacuating the education complex in time. He points out that his orders were to evacuate the House of Congress first. She reminds him that since he deposed her son's father, he's a senior officer of the military elite, and he should have acted like one, making the orders instead of merely following them. Brogan makes excuses and returns to supervise the rescue operation. Once they're alone, Questa says Calcula was being unfair, but she says he was not wise to place complete trust in Major Brogan. She reveals that he's a peace activist, which must surely conflict with the military responsibilities. Quest is concerned that Brogan doesn't reveal his personal beliefs to him personally. Calcula wonders if there's anything else the Major has not told him. Davros and Margentine have walked miles and eventually stop for a rest on top of a hill overlooking the city. Davros is concerned that the rescue parties will be looking for them in the wrong place, but his teacher says they've come too far to turn back now, and he should think of this as an educational excursion. The light is starting to fade, and Davros wants to go back, but Margentine urges him to look to the other side of the hill where there are thousands of miles of desert. The line mountains in the distance. Margentine suddenly reveals that the desert was where his son was murdered by Davros' father. The teacher pulls out a gun when the boy realizes he wasn't ready to enjoy the view. Margentine explains that his son was blindfolded and executed after being accused by Nosgard of running away. Davros refuses to be blamed for his father's actions, but Margentine is angry that someone killed Nosgard before he had a chance to do it himself. He thinks the bomb was too quick and that Nosgard didn't suffer enough. Margentine wanted him to lose every last member of his family, one by one, starting with this innocent little boy. This is the real reason he offered to give Davros unpaid tutorials, if necessary, just in order to close to him. It amuses Margentine to think that Calcula would never find out what happened to Davros unless someone stumbles upon this shallow grave by chance. Davros is disappointed as he thought Margentine was ingeniously interested in intellectual development. The teacher assures him he actually regrets the loss of such a promising young life. His own son always wanted to be a scientist too, but he lacked Davros' intelligence and died as a humble and now disgraced corporal. Margentine's personal ambitions died with his son, and all he has now is the desire for revenge. But Davros points out that if he gives in to his emotions, he will cease to be a true scientist. Davros suggests there are things he can learn from Margentine that he would never have been able to teach his own son. Slowly, Margentine comes to realize he can't go ahead with it, and he powers down his weapon. Davros asks to have the gun just in case he changes his mind. Quested tells Calcula that his son and Margentine did the right thing by removing themselves from the area until the danger had passed. Calcula is relieved and felt sure that teacher would keep Davros away from any real harm, as his best student is so important to him. Quested believes this latest attack was underlined, and the need for greater security for and her children, as well as the other members of the council, but she assures him she can look for herself. He points out that her income will be limited, and now that her husband is dead, she reminds him that until the foul spy in their midst is exposed and dealt with, every single one of them is in a vulnerable position. Martin thinks it's a miracle that his laboratory was still intact when the building was destroyed, and that they weren't killed when the missile struck, and Davros thinks he must be leading a charmed life as he's come close to death 3 times a day. Martin says he's truly sorry about what happened on the hill, but he was blinded by grief. He appreciated it if he was never spoken of again, and Davros assures him the incident is already forgotten, and he'll say nothing of it to his mother. Martin and his radiation experiments are too important to him, and there's still work to be done. Davros will need his teacher to explain the next batch of test results, but Martin hasn't been selected as subjects yet. Davros points out that several people were killed during the missile attack, and a number of others were injured and were close to death. He suggests that their research should be better served by the study of how radioactivity affects skeletal metabolism, and that they could use their near-dead as test subjects. The information they learn will provide greater long-term benefits for their people in the event of nuclear war. Martin agrees readily and says the hospital can supply with their next volunteers. Quested argues that though Major Brogan may be a peace activist, that doesn't make him a spy. So while his political views were inconvenient, he's not necessarily an enemy of the Cowled people. Calcula insists that he's a traitor, a soldier who's willing to fight, who questions orders of his superior officers, and who maneuvered himself into the position of authority to get close to the council. Worse, he then attempted to cover his tracks by killing the man he usurped. Quested accompanies Calcula to watch her daughter's first participation in the execution squad. Yavel was hand-picked by the council from the military academy, a sure sign that he's growing up. She's been told that a traitor has been discovered, and yet she's surprised to learn that the man they're about to execute was also involved in her father's death and was planning to destroy her entire family. The squad fall into line as the person is escorted out. When the covers move from her head, she was horrified to learn that it's Major Brogan. He protests his innocence, and Yavel demands an explanation from her mother. Convinced that Brogan stands for peace and he isn't a traitor, Calcula insists that Brogan had motive, method, and opportunity to murder Nazgard, and she orders her daughter back into line under the threat of being shot herself. Yavel realizes that neither Calcula nor Quested hold the military rank, so they shouldn't be here. She claims the court-martial is a travesty. Calcula turns to her daughter and reminds her that she's a soldier and a student of the military youth, so she was responsibility to perform her duty. Regretfully, Yavel agrees to do as she's told. The execution squad prime their weapons as Brogan calls out that his only crime was to want peace, but Calcula twists his words so they appear to be a confession. The squad open fires and Brogan's body falls to the ground. Quested thanks the squad on behalf of the Khaled nation, and for Calcula, it's a proud day indeed. Later, Davros returns home to find Yavel alone. She tells her brother that Calcula is attending a meeting of Quested's apartment. Davros tells her he wanted to speak to their mother about the execution, but he can talk to Yavel instead, as Major Brogan was a friend. But she still believes the wrong man was executed and recalls him saying that the war can do terrible things to good people. Now she also thinks the war can allow bad people to get away with terrible things. She no longer knows whether she wants to be a soldier, not if it means having to kill innocent people. She tells Davros that Brogan only wanted to help find a peaceful solution to the war, and that her brother wonders that if that means the Major would be agreed to help him too. She thinks he would, so Davros asks her to find out whether he can have Brogan's body for medical research, as it would be such a wasteful body. It was just burned or thrown away. Yavel is horrified at the suggestion and pushes Davros away, calling him a sick, cold-hearted monster. She screams at him and tells him she no longer regards him as her brother. Quest would propose a toast to the end of the war, but Calcula reminds him that this isn't over yet, and he's being a little optimistic. However, he thinks that if her suspicions about Brogan were correct, it will soon be possible to break and the deadlock, have victory in their sights. Calcula is worried that if any of his fellow counselors see him celebrating, they think she got used to the idea of being a widow very quickly. He urges her to find another husband. She admits she wasn't particularly happy in her marriage to Nosgard, so it might be better to remain aloof and alone from now on. Then Quested asks her to marry him, as though they should have done, and was dim dueling fiancés. Should have done many years ago. He also wonders if Davros should finally be introduced to his real father, but Calcula would only do when she considers the time is appropriate. Questa thinks Davros is old enough to understand, but Calcula is worried he'll resent her for keeping the truth from him so long. Tashik came very close to telling Davros on a number of occasions, and Calcula regrets not silencing her years ago. Davros tells Margentine that he was unable to secure Major Brogan's body for them, as his sister became loud and abusive at the idea. His teacher isn't too concerned, as he really wants a living body for their next experiment, because their last volunteer died too quickly to be of any real use. The effect of a genetic mutation was far less traumatic than it might have been, so he suggests that they try again with someone else. Davros wonders whether his sister could be persuaded to volunteer herself. Margentine asks him to convict of some samples from outside the radiation chamber, but once he steps outside, Davros slams the door shut, trapping the teacher inside. He tells Margentine that he wants to find out what happens to living, healthy tissue when the radiation is set to maximum power. His teacher demands to be released and threatens to tell Davros' mother, but Davros plans to visit her right now at Quest's apartment until the Margentine commits suicide over the death of his son. He leaves the laboratory, ignoring the desperate banging on the chamber door. The argument between Quested and Calcula is becoming heated, as the counselor insists that Davros has the right to know who his real father is. Calcula believes this would hurt her son, as lineage of Nosgard is held in high regard by Kali society, and she doesn't want their reputation tainted by scandal or gossip. However, Quested argues that although she's respected her wish to say anything about their relationship for the last 16 years, it was always understood that should the situation change, they'd be able to form a more permanent and visible partnership. Calcula laughs and says she never felt they had anything other than a working relationship, which Quested finds amazing, as they had a child together. He's worried Davros will believe his mother became pregnant simply to further her own ambitions. He tries to persuade her they have nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide, but she tells him she's gone to a great deal of trouble to cover her tracks. It was useful that Major Brogan shouldered the blame over the deaths of her husband and his increasingly indiscreet sister. But perhaps he was an innocent scapegoat for the real spy, and Quested has been making a number of diplomatic visits to the Thals in recent years. Calcula reminds Quested of an increasingly quote he made recently. Even if there wasn't a spy, it might be useful to invent one just in case. It suddenly dawns on him that Major Brogan was executed purely on Calcula's evidence, and that she condemned an innocent man. He grabs her and demands to know how many other people died because of her. At that moment, Davros arrives, orders him to leave his mother alone. Quest assures Davros he won't hurt either of them, but Davros pulls out Margentine's gun. The counselor reveals that he's Davros' father, but the boy refuses to believe it and shoots Quested dead before he could say anything more. Davros takes his mother back to the laboratory and shows her the mutated form Martin inside the chamber. The teacher's still alive, but in a barely recognizable state, pleads with Davros to kill him. Calculus horrified. Does Davros have no idea how difficult it is to find a good tutor? To have survived in there for this length of time, Martin must be stronger than he looks. Calculus thinks it would have been better if he perished. Davros disagrees. It's better if he lives so he can help Davros' further experiment. Just then, the air raid as sirens begin again. Calculus assures her word son that his isn't the end. It's just the beginning.